Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Give people another minute to filter back in. People are starting to come back, so we'll wait one more minute. So while we're letting people come back in, what I'd like to continue to do is what we did in the beginning, which is just to get to know some of the people that are in the group a little bit better. So I'm going to share my screen again. We're seeing some new sparks come in. I also see some new names. First, let me say, if you weren't in the previous session, we are recording all of the sessions today. And that's because we really believe the Cognitive City should be a place where we can take all forms of data, including the videos from presentations, the videos from conversations, and be able to mash it up with other forms of data to help to spark new ideas. So please be aware that it will be recorded. All the sessions are going to be recorded, and we may use parts of the presentations or the conversations in other material that we put together either inside or outside the Cognitive City. So let's see some new faces. So let's see if I see Katie. Let's see if we have Katie in our network of people. Yeah, here. So Katie, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, I see you've got a background in science communication, public speaking, strategic planning, facilitation. You want to pick one of these nodes that you entered and tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a federal relations officer at the Association of American Universities. So we represent some of the leading research institutions in the U.S. And I am basically an advocate in front of Congress for federal investments in science and humanities research. So I do a lot of appropriations work, but I also do, and this sprung up from my interest as a graduate student initially, a lot of more policy work, both federal agency policy, but also institutional policy work on accelerating public access to research outputs. So actually, I work with Natalie over at the University of Notre Dame on helping institutions set up their policies and incentive structures to help, get publicly supported research out into the ecosystem faster.
Mm-hmm.
So right now we're really focused on research data, but it also includes articles as well.
So I noticed that you've got this methodology of facilitation, which is something that a number of other members of the community have as well. how does facilitation play out in your role? What does facilitation mean sort of specifically to the domain that you're in?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of a facilitation, I would say, is kind of like a side skill that was kind of had to be developed, along with advocacy because of the convenings that we have with our members. So we convene presidents and chancellors, vice presidents for research at universities, provosts, graduate deans, also other kind of tangentially related folks that are in the university ecosystem, like librarians, like Natalie, chief information officers, and those folks. And what we often try and do, especially on this public access side, because it touches so many facets of an institution, is we try and bring the vice president for research office folks together with the library, with the provost, sometimes even with the general counsel if privacy issues and data are involved, to really think about how, as an institution, do we work on this kind of hairy big issue, considering so many parts of the institution touch this. And so facilitating conversations and discussions with people from the university community that aren't always talking to each other every day in a decentralized kind of university environment. It takes a lot of, I think, coming up with good discussion questions and, even little things like icebreakers to help folks become more comfortable with each other.
Well, yeah, it resonates with me. Facilitation is one of the things, as you can see, we're trying to do inside the cognitive city, and facilitating in a virtual domain sort of different than you might do in a physical group. I see Adam here. So Adam, let's see if I can find your node. And you gave a lightning talk. You want to tell us a little bit about your lightning talk?
Yeah, I can do that. I am obviously a new face to many of you, and you are all brand new faces to me because this is a new realm for me. Like Katie, I work with Natalie Myers. I would say maybe unlike Katie, I travel in Natalie's wake and was brought in at her suggestion. My experiences with doing anything related to COVID are magnificently literal and physical. I have a very tightly constrained problem that I can provide a solution to. Working in the broader discussions about discussion landscape is something that is not a skill that I have. So this is a magnificent little foray into the unknown for me. But effectively, yeah, I make stuff. People give me problems. I try to fix them with physical things, and it's a very literal product supply relationship.
Well, thanks for taking a foray into the unknown with us. So this was the lightning talk that you gave, and it's nice to see that actually we have a few sparks that have been entered as a result of this lightning talk. So let's look at a couple of these. Has COVID-19 changed how 3D models are developed or shared between labs? So I realize I haven't connected these sparks to users. I'll do that in a second. Is this Tom's spark? You on mute?
Yes, that one is mine. Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you talk about this, and let's be interesting to hear if Adam or anybody else has any thoughts about COVID-19 changing 3D models.
So yeah, I mean, I think it was a relatively simple idea or spark, and I was just kind of thinking about how 3D model itself, like the file itself, is data, which can be open source and can be done, and how has COVID kind of changed? Like this pandemic's kind of caused everybody to have the same basic goal, I think, right? And there might be different forms of that, but I think that it's all the same basic thing, which is to get back to some kind of normal thing, and normal life. And I think that common goal has caused some obstacles to be removed, or some artificial barriers to collaboration. And I'm wondering if the sharing of 3D models has been able to kind of take part in that. Like, is there, I think it's just a simple thing, right? There's been open data sets made on publications and research papers, like with Cord and things like that. And the same thing I think could happen with 3D models as other things as well. So
I would definitely say it's changed the landscape that I interact with. I mean, we had always looked at our makerspace at the University of Notre Dame as we have these printers, we print in this material. But actually, after responding to broad PPE shortages, there was such kind of that was a community building event, to be honest, where everybody was, oh hey, I can cut Mylar, for face shields. I can print in this. I can print in that. And we started seeing so many more models that would go up. And this was the model of the head strap. This was the head strap V2. This was the head strap V3. And it was really kind of an echo of the early days of the Enable movement, where here's this hand prosthetic, and that was shared widely. It was kind of an open source model, and then really has kind of tapered off as far as the community building of these things. There are still people that still work within the Enable movement and are still working on tweaking prosthetics and kind of open sharing of those things. But honestly, it doesn't get the press. It doesn't get people thinking about it. It doesn't get higher up cabinet members asking to continue to participate in this. And I think that top down push at the same time as you get the makerspace push from people that are just willing to share their stuff that is largely idle. Because we're about 15 years away from when it was cool and new, right? So there's an idleness that we're trying to fill. And I think, yeah, the community is definitely coming together, that we're just, all of our spaces are becoming all of our spaces. And people are willing to share their tech. People are willing to use up their idle filament for the sake of putting out a product, yeah.
yeah, and I think that, my spark was kind of getting at trying to understand how making that data fair has changed because of the pandemic. Like, does fairness, is the definition of fairness in the 3D space or 3D model space and makerspace community change to help make your models easier to find by stakeholders who you didn't even know existed before the pandemic? So it's not really a question. I'm just saying, like, that's the kind of direction that I think my mind's going towards as I think about what's going on here.
Well, let me jump in there for a second. You mentioned FAIR, which, for those of us that work with data, we know that acronym is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. I just clicked on FAIR here, and we have some members in the group that connected themselves to FAIR, one of whom is Natalie. Natalie, you have any thoughts about FAIR applied to 3D models?
Yeah, I think Adam really shared with us, to me, what one of the most powerful elements of FAIR is. Findability is important. You showed us that on your video about searching PubMed in the lightning talks for this session, about how findability, there's nuance to that filters alone can't fill. But with FAIR, there's also accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. Think of accessibility as, can you machine read the license and know if it's okay for you to print and redistribute that gizmo? Then think of interoperability of, who can tell your printer to print it? And then think of reuse in the context of Adam updating the 3D schematic for the Falcon tube holder to be easier, less expensive to print, and other labs being able to take advantage of that. That's a physical example of reuse that's terrific. As soon as he shares that code back as part of the network or part of the graph of potential people who might need a tube rack, then that tube rack becomes useful not just for the current COVID situation, but for any lab that faces a supply chain challenge. So FAIR can work to all our advantage. The other part of it I like is that FAIR is open as necessary, or sorry, as open as possible, as closed as necessary. What that means is that the license rules and the machine readability of that license can protect the originator's intellectual property rights, but also help maintain the veracity of particular designs. So as open as necessary, and how we construe the openness and the tension with openness and intellectual property with FAIR is nuanced and can work to all our advantage.
You know, it's interesting by sort of shifting the conversation from the 3D models to the language of FAIR, it does end up connecting, as you said, to the lightning talk that I loaded up, which was about, you know, navigating resources, COVID-19 resources with a termscape. And I hadn't really thought about the ways that the navigation of the publication data are, you know, similar to some of the same challenges navigating 3D models. So like, you know, one thing I'm particularly interested in is how you find something when you don't know the right term to search for. So like Adam, it was interesting for me seeing the term, you know, falcon. Falcon, like the bird, is that the word that you're using over and over again with this? Yeah, okay, I see you nodding. So, you know, you guys use that as if it was just like a known thing. I had never heard this term before. And so I found myself thinking that, you know, if I don't know to search for that, I don't know that I necessarily find the holder. And when it comes to 3D printing stuff, I wonder how many items might be able to be used for some purpose other than perhaps their original intended purpose, or they can act as a base for someone to modify them for a different purpose. But how do you promote that kind of findability when it's not an exact one-to-one match? I don't know, any thoughts on, and is that even a legitimate thing to try and promote? Any thoughts on that? And you're muted, by the way.
Is that question directly for me?
Yeah, or anybody else.
I had the same difficulty. The only reason I was using Falcon Tube is because that's what it was told to me. You know, previously I was just calling them test tube holders until someone said, "Oh yeah, the Falcon tubes." But if someone's searching, you're right, test tube holders, then they're not going to find it. You know, so I don't have an answer for that one other than let me just add 80 different, you know, tags to each one of the models that goes up. I think
right. Then you're going to get a network that looks like this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's navigate that network. You know, if we're on the topic of this lightning talk, there was a spark that came in. This is from Bobak. So Bobak, you want to tell us about the spark that you thought of?
Yes. Hello again. Actually, I was looking into your the work that you have done about getting these words from these publications and putting it in a graph network, and I thought it was really interesting to give some idea about those. But then I was wondering if it can be done some kind of sentiment analysis, which is a part of a natural language programming. It's a part now. I think it's the own huge division of AI that some people are doing. Can add something into this part. And then I was refreshing my mind about different methodologies that are available and different data sets that might be available. And then it reminds me about, I don't know if you have heard about that Kaggle competition. If you know about Kaggle, it's a well-known website for machine learning guys and data scientists who puts competition for different matters. And I think they started also the same idea of put it in a competition. The name is COVID-19 Open Research Dataset Challenge. So I can put it here, the link
please.
for you also. And yeah, this was my basic idea when I was looking into that really interesting graph. I was thinking maybe a sentiment analysis can also add something, because not just the words, but the ideas can connect similar ideas behind each of these publications. And then I reminded that there was such a call for that from Kaggle a few months, I think, at the earliest start of this COVID.
I think this is a really interesting concept in terms of ways to supplement machine reading with more algorithmic intelligence. So, you know, you mentioned sentiment analysis. I think that sentiment analysis is just one of a number of, you know, NLP, natural language processing techniques that can be applied. One of the ones I think is particularly potentially valuable in the use case that I showed in the lightning talk is being able to try and understand the relationship between different entities that are mentioned in a paper. So for example, if you have a COVID paper that talks about you know, let's say cough and mortality, I don't necessarily want to just know that those two concepts are discussed. I want to know if the paper is saying that there's any relationship. Is there a positive correlation? Is there a negative correlation between these entities? And so I think this is a really interesting area when you think about trying to layer some natural language processing approaches on top of the data. I find myself thinking back to the 3D conversation we were having in terms of being able to do some similar analysis in which a machine could say, okay, well, I'm gonna read the description of this 3D object, but then try and add some of those tags automatically that Adam mentioned about, well, what's this good for? What other types of objects might it work with, or what use cases might it apply to? So is there anybody else in the group that has experience with natural language processing and anything to add from that perspective? Otherwise, I'm going to click on another Spark and go from there. Let's go to this one. So this was another literature related lightning talk. So my lightning talk was looking at COVID literature. This is another one that came in from Jennifer. There was a Spark preprints. So this was Katie's. Katie, you want to mention the idea that got sparked for you, or the question that got raised?
Yeah, so yeah, in my Spark, you can see that I wrote, I'm intrigued by, I think, the community that has sprung up, I guess, built on what was already there in the age of the pandemic, and needing to read information really quickly, get results out really quickly, and not having the kind of traditional publishing model necessarily be in a place to do that as quickly as, frankly, the country and the world needed it. And so it's my understanding that there is this kind of community of folks that, you know, just naturally have researchers have come up to be kind of the quality control on what we're seeing being published or being put out there, I guess, in the ether, and that's outside of the normal publishing model. So as I say in my Spark, I think it certainly puts the scientific community, kind of turns it on its head a little bit from what we're used to, the normal dissemination process for research, but I think in a good way. So I ask a question in there about, you know, what has the community's response been, or scientists' response been to, you know, the pulling of preprints and actually published articles, because I think that's a really interesting opportunity that has sprung up out of this. If there's a silver lining, I guess, in COVID, and I'm intrigued to see where that goes.
This seems related to a number of concepts that are in the graph around, you know, digital librarianship, communication, science communication. I'm just clicking on a couple sort of different concepts that seem related to me as I was hearing you talk. And seeing, who else in the group is connected to some of these things. Let's see, is Hector still on? Oh yeah, Hector. So I see you're
Yeah, I'm here.
connected to communication. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what Katie was talking about, or this concept of sort of disseminating scientific information in the sort of COVID pandemic era.
Yeah, I think this is quite a key topic. In fact, for example, for the study that Claudia and I published recently, which is in the knowledge graph, we had the opportunity to also do some interviews with the general media in order to, like on TV and radio, in order to bring these ideas, these findings into the general public, so that it's not only for the researchers who go into scientific journals, but also reaches the general public to inform them.
This set of topics around communication seems to connect to a number of people. I don't know, Austin, Natalie, I'm not sure if Jordan or Amani are on. Anybody else have thoughts on this? I see Pamela Dasher, a new person joining in the group. Let's see if I can find her and see how she connects to our network that we're building. Here you go. So Pamela, you've got some subject experience in global health. Want to tell us a little bit about your background in global health, and then we'll pull you into the conversation?
Sure. Apologies on my late arrival. But I have some background working on infectious disease prevention programs, mainly as a contractor for USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. And I recently joined Critical Path Institute here in Arizona, Tucson, Arizona. And I'll be working with them on a COVID pilot for an app that the FDA created about a year ago.
And what does the app do?
So the app is kind of meant to be an open source database. Right now, it's mostly for healthcare workers and licensed clinicians to go and enter any data they have on certain diseases that have unmet needs. So meaning any diseases that doctors are currently trying to treat using other drugs meant for other purposes. So we want to see if there are any trends in these drugs that doctors are using to treat diseases that aren't necessarily meant for that disease specifically, but work as a treatment. And we're looking to see if there are any trends right now with some COVID patient data that we're trying to get from our participants, and see if there's a trend between certain drugs that doctors have been using to find that works effectively.
It's interesting. A few minutes ago, I think before you joined, we were talking about a lightning talk that Adam and David gave about 3D models, and we were talking about how people, through better indexing, people might be able to find a 3D model that wasn't originally designed for their use case, but maybe could be applied to their use case either as is or with some modification. And it sounds like you're talking about the kind of drug equivalent of that.
Yes, yeah, pretty much.
It's super interesting. I see that if I look at this topic of global health in the network, this is something that connects a number of people who are on the call and some people that we haven't heard from. So to continue my trend of putting people on the spot, Amel, I see that you've joined us and you've got a background in global health as well. How is your global health perspective similar or different to Pamela's? Is she really on the conference? Maybe, maybe not. We'll give her 1 second to find the mute button, and then maybe I'll pick somebody else instead. This is the way that you find out who joins the conference to get their name to show up, but actually is, doing something else. So let's see. So Claudia, you're also connected to global health. Any overlap with what Pamela was discussing?
So not really directly, but in the context of COVID, let's say, we looked at the mental well-being and how the quarantine itself affects the mental states of the population. So we ran a online study and found out that we can actually evaluate the well-being of the population by looking at how they evaluate the emotive content of images, basically. So how positive or negative they are. And we're currently developing an application for online monitoring of the affected states, because I mean, we know that COVID itself is going to have an impact of our physical well-being, let's say, but implicitly it's going to affect, and it has been affecting the mental well-being as well. And this might have long-term consequences. So to mitigate these consequences and monitor the population at risk, we want to implement this in something that is can be continuously monitoring the users. Yeah, something like that.
Thanks. I see, a couple other people that haven't been pulled into the conversation. I'm gonna find Mitch. Mitch, any, as I locate you in the network, there you are. Any, you're connected to public health. Any thoughts about how your experience in public health kind of integrates with any of the things that have been talked about so far?
Let's see. One sec. Sorry, coming to join here. Yeah, well, I have a background in systems and operations engineering in a couple of different industries. And I found myself moving into the health space and studying public health and getting a degree in public health as well. So I'm kind of interested in, and Dave, you and I have had some chats about this. I'm interested in kind of the landscape discussion as a whole, right? How do we, as a collective entity, process information? And most of the public health problems today are complex in nature, and there are a lot of different entities and groups that are always doing different things. And so, how do we better collaborate? How do we better share information and work collectively to accomplish things effectively? And I think some of the points you brought up already today in your earlier talk are very relevant, right? Where we have so much information, there's almost a sense of information overload. And even when we're solving or trying to, as a society, tackle COVID as a whole, we're running into problems where there's so much information and so many different disparate efforts that maybe we could be a little bit more effective if we're more effectively connected. So I think that's kind of really where my interests are in terms of how do you look at things from a system engineering perspective, and how do you apply some of those principles to solving these complex problems in the public health space.
I think it's interesting that, public health is also connected to a spark that got entered a little bit earlier. And this might be an interesting opportunity for us to experiment with this spark, because I saw that Sean had joined the morning session, but sent a note that he was off to class. He's a professor, and that he wasn't able to join able to join this session. But I sort of wonder if we look at his spark, if it would generate any ideas for us. So I've pulled it up here, simplicity and communication. He wrote, the Feynman diagram is new notation. Notation is something that is hard to invent and slow to develop. To communicate COVID-19 statistics and ideas, we need simple, unambiguous metrics and visualizations, e.g. the flattening the curve concept was so well done, but then data graphs often have different and inconsistent axes, hidden assumptions, subtleties, and definitions. So, you know, what I take away from this Spark is Sean sort of challenging us to think about the balance between complexity and simplicity. Obviously, the data are complex, but I think he makes a good point that, you know, that Feynman diagram I brought up, I don't know that any of us, maybe if there's a physicist in the group, I don't know that any of us looked at it and took anything away from it. Whereas flattening the curve is something that people can look at and take something away. Any thoughts? I mean, maybe from some of the data visualization people, any thoughts on how we find this balance between simplicity and complexity? Hector, you're connected to data visualization. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's not really my area of main expertise, but well, it's clear that whenever we're visualizing data, it must be informative enough while also avoiding misrepresenting the data itself. We have been seeing lately that the general population has been exposed to a lot of data visualizations, much more than ever before, given that we spend now a lot of hours looking at graphs of how the number of infections is rising and also many other metrics. And we have seen within this a few successes in making these visualizations really successful in transmitting information, but also some other visualizations that are actually quite bad in the sense that they are quite misleading.
I think this is very much going to be the subject of Jeremy's talk, Viz Responsibly. And so, you know, what we're about to do after we end this session is we'll take a break, and then we'll go into the 4 featured presentations. One of which is this one, and Jeremy works at Tableau. It's going to be really interesting to get a perspective from Tableau in terms of how to do data visualization responsibly. We've also got some talks related to a few other topics. Kim, I see you're on. Do you want to briefly mention the topic you'll be talking about?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Gallen, and I'm going to be talking a little bit today about data, but also about information exchange as it relates to racial disparities in COVID-19. That's been one of the big stories out of the pandemic, how it has highlighted once again some of the health disparities that are byproducts of systemic racism. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about COVID Black and how the work that we do, both with data and health information, will help doctors, public health experts inform their decision making about how to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 and unfortunately future infectious diseases that are probably inevitable. So not to put a little damper on that, but I'm looking forward to sharing that with everyone.
Great, thank you so much. And you can see that some of the key terms that Kim's tagged, both herself and the talk that she's going to be giving, kind of intersect with some of the things that we've talked about, like you know, public health informatics. And so hopefully you can start to see ways that these talks will work together. And after we separate, go into our separate tracks to look at these talks, we'll come back together as a group and we'll synthesize the ideas and the sparks that emerge from that. So what we'll do now is we'll take another break. Again, the idea is—
Dave,
oh,
here.
Go ahead.
This is good. If you can move to the conference.
Oh, yeah, great.
So one of the things that you'll notice if you scroll down to the next couple talks is that you will have an attending button next to your name. Your page will look different than Dave's, obviously, if you're attending different talks. And this actually will help us to determine who's in the session. We've got views that will allow your node to pop up if you are going to be attending a session. So you can either click the node right there, or, you know, this is, right, once you, once you click the node, it'll actually let you say which session you're going to. And then we're gonna take a 15-minute break. And this is a break for you to do whatever you'd like. But one of the things you could do, if you haven't had a chance to watch the talk, you've got enough time to watch the talk a little bit and to start to enter sparks. So we'll be having smaller conversations similar to the conversations we've already had this morning, based on the talks that were uploaded by our presenters. So in the next hour, we're looking at you can either attend Jeremy Blaney's talk, Biz Responsibly, how are you using data to navigate the unknown? Or you can attend Natalie Meyer's talk, Sharing Research During Public Health Emergencies. So we'll take a break unless unless anybody has any questions before we go into this next section.
And I'll just add that, you know, the goal, part of recording these online and putting them, you know, in this virtual format is to do things a little differently than you would do in an in-person session. What we want to do is be able to use our in-person time for conversation and be able to use your individual time to digest the content on your own. So pick which one of these you want to attend. If you haven't watched it already, use the 15-minute break to check it out. And then when we come into the session, the presenter is not going to re-give the talk. They're going to just summarize some of the key points. And then we're going to have a smaller group discussion about questions and ideas that come up around that particular topic. So we'll stop there. It's a different Zoom link for depending on which session you want to join. So use this conference page. I'll end this Zoom meeting, and then Terry will be facilitating the conversation with Natalie. I'll be facilitating the conversation with Jeremy, and we'll see you at 1/4 in the respective Zoom room. See you then. Thanks.